The morning air was cool and quiet, carrying the soft smell of damp earth and flowers. The cemetery was almost empty, except for a few visitors who walked slowly among the rows of graves. The sun had just started to rise, casting a soft golden light over the headstones. And there was a gentle stillness that made every sound seem louder than usual. Birds chirped softly in the distance, and the faint rustle of leaves added to the calmness of the place. A man was kneeling in front of a grave, carefully placing fresh flowers on the ground. His hands were steady, but his eyes betrayed a deep sadness that seemed to weigh him down. He spoke quietly, almost as if he was talking to himself, or maybe to the person he was visiting. His voice was soft, filled with emotion, and each word seemed to carry the weight of many memories. He remembered the times they had shared, the moments of laughter, the advice given, the kindness shown in ways that were quiet but meaningful. As he sat there, a woman approached. She was dressed in fine clothes, and there was a sense of authority and wealth in the way she carried herself. But despite her appearance, there was a softness in her eyes, a vulnerability that only grief could show. She had come to visit the grave of her husband, a man she had loved deeply, but who had passed away too soon. Today she felt a mix of sadness and curiosity, because she had noticed the stranger kneeling at her husband's grave. She had never seen him before, and yet he seemed to care in a way that was both shocking and touching. She walked slowly, careful not to disturb him, but her presence did not go unnoticed. The man looked up briefly, his eyes meeting hers for a moment. There was a flicker of surprise, but also recognition of the shared sadness between them. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should speak. Finally, she took a deep breath and asked, "Excuse me, why do you care so much about my husband?" The stranger looked down, his hands still resting on the flowers. He did not speak immediately. There was a long pause, filled with the quiet sounds of the cemetery. Then he began to explain. He told her that many years ago, when he was struggling in life, her husband had helped him. He had given him advice, shown him kindness, and offered opportunities that he never thought he would have. Her husband had treated him like a friend, even when the stranger was barely surviving, barely making ends meet. The memories came back vividly as he spoke. It was clear that her husband's actions had left a permanent mark on his life. The woman listened carefully, her eyes widening with surprise and emotion. She had known her husband as a kind and generous man, but she had never realized the depth of his impact on other people's lives. She had always seen him in the context of their marriage, their home, and their immediate circle of friends. But here was someone whose life had been changed entirely because of his quiet, selfless actions. The stranger continued to speak, sharing details that seemed both ordinary and extraordinary. He told her about the times her husband had gone out of his way to help him during moments of crisis, the encouragement he had given when the stranger felt hopeless, and the belief he had shown in him when no one else did. Each story painted a picture of a man who lived his values every day. It's not for recognition or reward, but simply because it was the right thing to do. As she listened, the woman felt a mix of emotions. There was grief, of course, for the loss of her husband, but there was also awe and admiration, and a growing sense of connection to this stranger who had been so profoundly affected by the man she had loved. She realized that her husband's life was far more meaningful than she had fully understood, that his legacy extended far beyond their home, far beyond the life they had shared. The stranger spoke of small moments, seemingly insignificant at first, that had carried immense weight. He described how her husband had treated people with respect, how he had listened without judgment, how he had offered help without expecting anything in return. These were not grand gestures of wealth or fame, but simple acts of humanity that left a lasting impact, and they had shaped the stranger's life in ways that he would carry forever. The woman felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had been consumed by her own grief, by the emptiness left in her life. But hearing these stories brought a new perspective. She realized that even in death, her husband's presence could still touch lives, inspire people, and create ripples of kindness that spread far beyond what she had imagined. The stranger paused, looking at her with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "I wanted you to know," he said softly, "that your husband was not just important to you. He changed my life. He made me believe in goodness, in people, and myself. I owe him more than I can ever say." The woman knelt down beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. She felt the warmth of shared grief and understanding. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know he had touched so many lives. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for sharing his story." They sat together for a long while, the stranger speaking in quiet tones, sharing memories and experiences that revealed the true character of the man they both loved and admired. The woman began to see her husband, not just as a husband, but as a man whose kindness had left a mark on the world. She began to understand the profound impact one person could have when they lived with integrity, compassion, and selflessness. The cemetery around them remained quiet, the world moving slowly as if honoring the moment. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting gentle patterns on the ground. The woman and the stranger continued to share stories, laughed softly at moments of humor remembered, and sighed deeply at moments of sadness. There was a healing in the sharing, a sense that grief could be transformed into connection, understanding, and even gratitude. As the morning passed, the woman realized that this encounter was unexpected but precious. She had come to the cemetery to mourn, but she was leaving with a new perspective, a new sense of her husband's legacy, and a connection to a stranger who had been profoundly affected by the same man. They had met by chance, but their shared experience created a bond that would not be forgotten. Eventually, the stranger stood, brushing the dirt from his knees. He smiled softly, a mix of sadness and relief in his expression. "Thank you for listening," he said. "I needed to share this, and I am glad you heard it." The woman nodded, her eyes still wet with tears. "Thank you for coming," she replied. "Thank you for telling me. It means more than you know." They parted ways slowly, each carrying the memory of the encounter with them. The woman felt a renewed sense of purpose, inspired to honor her husband's legacy, not just through wealth, but through acts of kindness and compassion. The stranger walked away with a lighter heart, feeling gratitude for having shared his story and for the opportunity to honor the man who had changed his life. As the cemetery returned to its quiet stillness, the golden sunlight spread over the graves, illuminating the flowers, the headstones, and the lives that had been touched in ways both seen and unseen. The morning had begun with sorrow, but it ended with a sense of connection, understanding, and hope. The stranger and the woman had both experienced a moment of clarity, a recognition of the power of kindness and the enduring impact of a life well lived. And in that quiet cemetery, surrounded by the echoes of love, loss, and gratitude, they each carried forward a piece of the man who had touched them both, forever changed by his generosity, his compassion, and his unwavering humanity. The stranger remained standing by the grave for a moment, gathering his thoughts while the woman watched him closely. There was a weight in the air, a mixture of grief, respect, and something almost unspoken between them. She could feel the depth of his feelings. The way every word he spoke carried more than just memories, it carried gratitude, lessons learned, and the quiet acknowledgement of a life changed. She waited patiently. Sensing that there was more to the story than he had shared so far, he began to speak again, his voice soft but steady. Years ago, he explained, he had been struggling to find direction in life. Every day felt like a battle just to survive. He had no real support system, no one who believed in him, and he often wondered if things would ever get better. Life seemed unfair, and he had grown accustomed to disappointment. But then, by chance, he met her husband. It was a meeting that seemed ordinary at first, but it became extraordinary over time. Her husband had seen something in him that no one else did, and he had chosen to act on it. The stranger recounted the first time her husband had helped him. He had been looking for work, sending out resumes that went unanswered, feeling invisible in a world that moved on without noticing him. One day, her husband had come across him, offered a conversation, and asked simple questions about his life and dreams. It was not a grand gesture, but it was a beginning. He had listened attentively, without judgment, and then offered guidance, advice, and encouragement that changed how the stranger saw himself. He felt seen, understood, and valued for the first time in years. The woman listened intently, her eyes filling with tears as she realized that her husband had quietly changed someone's life, someone outside their family and social circle. She had always known him to be kind and generous. But hearing the stranger's story brought a new dimension to her understanding. She began to see her husband not only as the man she loved, but as someone whose goodness extended far beyond what she had imagined. The stranger continued, sharing more stories. He spoke of times when her husband had gone out of his way to provide opportunities, to help him grow, to make sure he had a chance to succeed. He described evenings spent discussing life's challenges, mornings where her husband had given practical advice, and moments of encouragement that had stayed with him through years of hardship. Each memory revealed a side of her husband that was quiet, humble, and yet immensely empathic. As he spoke, the woman could almost picture those moments in her mind. She imagined her husband's gentle smile, the patience in his voice, the way he had offered help without ever making the other person feel indebted. She realized that he had lived his values consistently, not for recognition or reward, but because he truly cared. She felt a mix of pride and sorrow, knowing that the man she loved had left behind a legacy that she was only beginning to understand. The stranger paused and looked at her. "I was lost," he said softly. "I didn't know how to find my way. But he gave me hope. He gave me direction. He showed me that there are people in this world who care, people who will lift you up when you are down. I owe him more than I can ever repay." The woman reached out and took his hand gently. There was a sense of connection in that simple gesture, a shared understanding that went beyond words. She realized that grief could bring people together in unexpected ways, and that her husband's kindness had created bonds that would last even after his passing. They spent hours talking, sharing stories that revealed her husband's character in small but profound ways. The stranger described times when her husband had intervened quietly to help others, moments that seemed insignificant at the time but had lasting effects. He had offered support to friends in need, given advice to those struggling with life, and treated everyone he met with respect and compassion. These acts of kindness had created a ripple effect, inspiring the stranger to pay it forward and help others in turn. The woman listened. Moved by the depth of her husband's impact, she began to understand that his legacy was not measured by wealth or status, but by the lives he touched, the hearts he influenced, and the hope he inspired in others. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for having known him, and for the chance to hear from someone whose life had been profoundly changed by his actions. The stranger's voice grew more emotional as he spoke of a particularly difficult time in his life. He had faced challenges that seemed insurmountable, moments when he felt like giving up entirely. But her husband had been there, offering guidance, encouragement, and practical help. He had shown faith in the stranger's abilities even when the stranger himself had doubted them. That belief had been transformative, giving him the courage to keep going, to strive for better, and to become a person he could be proud of. The woman felt tears streaming down her face as she listened. She had mourned her husband deeply, but hearing these stories brought a new understanding, a sense that his life had mattered in ways she had not fully appreciated. She realized that even in death, he continued to influence the world, leaving behind lessons of compassion, integrity, and selflessness that would endure far beyond her own lifetime. They talked about the stranger's life since then, how he had taken her husband's lessons to heart and applied them in his own life. He had sought to help others, inspired by the example he had been shown. The woman felt a mixture of pride and awe, realizing that her husband's kindness had created a chain of goodness that stretched far beyond what she could see. She began to see her grief in a new light, recognizing that her husband's influence was still alive in the people it touched. The conversation turned to reflection and memory. They shared stories of laughter, small acts of joy, and moments that had revealed her husband's true character. The stranger spoke of how he had learned to be patient, to listen, and to offer help without expecting anything in return. Each story painted a picture of a man whose goodness was quiet but powerful, shaping the lives of those around him in ways that were subtle but profound. The woman realized that her husband's life had created a legacy of hope, kindness, and inspiration. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, understanding that she could honor him not only through remembrance, but through action, through living with the same values he had shown and by continuing to support others in meaningful ways. As the morning faded into afternoon, the cemetery remained calm and quiet. The woman and the stranger sat together, feeling a connection that was born of shared grief and mutual respect. They had met by chance, yet their meeting felt meaningful, as if it had been meant to happen. In the presence of her husband's memory, they found solace, understanding, and a new perspective on the power of human kindness. Eventually, they stood together, taking one last look at the grave. The stranger smiled softly, a mixture of sadness and peace on his face. "Thank you for listening," he said. "It means a lot to share this with someone who loved him." The woman nodded, feeling the weight of her grief lifted slightly by the connection they had formed. "Thank you for coming," she replied. "Your words have helped me understand him in a way I never could have imagined." They parted ways slowly, each carrying the memory of the encounter with them. The woman felt inspired to honor her husband's legacy through her actions, while the stranger left with a sense of fulfillment and gratitude. The cemetery returned to its quiet stillness, the sunlight casting soft shadows over the graves, and the flowers swaying gently in the breeze. In that quiet place, two lives had intersected through the memory of a man who had lived with compassion, kindness, and unwavering humanity. His legacy, they realized, was not gone, it lived on in every life he had touched. And in every act of goodness that followed, the afternoon sunlight shifted slowly, casting long shadows over the cemetery. The woman and the stranger remained near the grave, their conversation carrying them deeper into the stories of her husband's life. There was something quiet and comforting about their shared presence, as if the very air around them was honoring the memory of a man who had lived with such integrity and care. Each word spoken seemed to echo softly against the gravestones. Carrying both grief and gratitude, the stranger continued to recount stories of her husband, describing moments that seemed small at first, yet held immense meaning. He spoke of a time when he had faced a crisis at work, feeling completely overwhelmed and unsure of his abilities. Her husband had reached out quietly, offering guidance and support, not through grand gestures or dramatic displays, but through patient listening and thoughtful advice. It was these moments, the stranger explained, that had built a foundation of confidence within him, a belief that he could overcome obstacles because someone had truly believed in him. The woman listened, imagining her husband in those quiet moments, offering his wisdom with a gentle smile. She realized that she had only ever seen him in the context of her daily life, but his influence extended far beyond that. It touched strangers. It guided people in ways she could never have imagined. Her grief mingled with admiration, and she felt a new appreciation for the depth of his character. The stranger spoke of another time when he had been facing personal difficulties. He had been struggling to provide for his family and had no one to turn to. Her husband had noticed, quietly stepped in, and offered assistance without asking for anything in return. It was not just the help itself that mattered, but the dignity and respect with which it was offered. The stranger had felt valued, supported, and understood, something that changed his perspective on life and people. He described how that act of kindness inspired him to help others in return, creating a chain of goodwill that continued even years later. The woman's eyes welled with tears as she realized the true scope of her husband's influence. She had mourned deeply, but she had not understood the full reach of his generosity and care. Hearing these stories brought a sense of connection, a feeling that his life had meaning far beyond what she had imagined. It was as if his spirit was alive, speaking through the gratitude and memories of those he had helped. They spoke about the stranger's own journey since meeting her husband. He described how her example had taught him to look for opportunities to support others, to act with compassion, and to live with integrity even when it was not easy. Her husband's quiet influence had shaped the stranger into someone who could carry forward his values, who could continue the legacy of kindness that had been so freely given to him. The woman realized that her husband had not only impacted one life, but had inspired a ripple effect, touching many others through the actions of those he had helped. The conversation flowed naturally, moving from moments of struggle to moments of triumph. The stranger shared stories of people he had met and helped because of what he had learned from her husband. Each story revealed the powerful impact of one person's kindness, showing how it could grow, spread, and continue to change lives long after the original act. The woman felt a deep sense of pride and purpose. Knowing that her husband's values lived on through the lives he had touched as they spoke, the woman began to share her own memories of her husband, recalling the quiet ways he had made a difference in her life and the lives of others around them. They laughed softly at the little things he had done, the unexpected gestures of thoughtfulness, the small acts of humor that had brought joy in difficult moments. They also shared moments of deep emotion, remembering the times he had comforted them both, guided them, and inspired them to be better. The stranger and the woman began to reflect on the lessons her husband had taught without ever intending to teach them. They spoke of patience, empathy, and the importance of seeing people for who they truly were. They discussed the power of listening, of giving without expecting, and of acting with quiet courage when faced with challenges. Each reflection seemed to deepen their understanding, showing them that her husband's influence was not only in the things he did, but in the example he set for others to follow. The woman felt a sense of peace beginning to settle in her heart. She realized that her grief, while still present, was accompanied by a newfound understanding of her husband's life and legacy. He had touched so many lives in ways she had never known, and that knowledge brought a sense of comfort and purpose. She understood that honoring him did not mean simply remembering him, but living in a way that reflected his values, continuing the work of kindness and compassion that he had begun. The stranger shared a story that struck her deeply. He spoke of a day when he had faced a moment of despair, feeling as if nothing could go right. Her husband had appeared in his life at that precise moment, offering guidance and encouragement that changed the course of the day and ultimately his life. It was a simple interaction, yet it had profound consequences. The stranger had carried that lesson forward, learning to be present, to notice opportunities to help, and to act with integrity even in difficult situations. This lesson had become a guiding principle in his life, one he attributed entirely to her husband's quiet influence. The woman thought about the countless lives her husband had touched, both directly and indirectly. She realized that his legacy was not just in the memories she held, but in the ongoing impact he had on the world through the people he had helped. It was a living legacy, one that continued to grow and spread, reaching places and people she could never have imagined. The thought brought her both sorrow and joy, a reminder of loss, but also a reminder of the power of one person's goodness. They spent hours together, speaking in quiet tones, sharing stories, and reflecting on the lessons her husband had imparted. Each story added depth to their understanding, revealing a man who had lived fully, who had acted with compassion, and who had quietly changed the lives of many. The woman felt a growing sense of connection to the stranger, a bond forged through shared grief and mutual respect. Bound together by the memory of her husband's life and values, the afternoon light began to fade, and the air grew cooler. The woman and the stranger finally stood, taking one last look at the grave. There was a sense of closure, not in the sense of ending, but in the sense of understanding and connection. They had shared stories, memories, and emotions that brought clarity and comfort, and they both felt the presence of her husband in the quiet, gentle moments they had experienced together. The stranger smiled softly, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you for listening and for sharing your memories," he said. "It has meant more than I can express." The woman nodded, her heart full of emotion. "Thank you for telling me," she replied. "You've helped me understand him in ways I never could have imagined." They parted slowly, carrying with them a sense of peace, understanding, and inspiration. The cemetery returned to its quiet stillness, with the sunlight fading into soft shadows. In that quiet place, they had found connection, reflection, and hope. Her husband's influence continued, not only in the memories they shared, but in the actions inspired by his life. And as they walked away, each carried a piece of his legacy forward, ready to live with the same compassion, integrity, and quiet strength that had touched them so deeply. The afternoon had slowly faded, and the cemetery was quiet except for the soft whisper of the wind through the trees. The woman and the stranger continued to stand near the grave, neither wanting to leave just yet. There was a depth in their conversation that neither had expected, a feeling that they were part of something larger than themselves. Connected by the life and memory of the man they both had known and admired, the stranger began to speak again, his voice calm but filled with emotion. He told her about the ways her husband had influenced not just his own life, but the lives of others around him. He explained how her husband had a habit of noticing small struggles that no one else saw, how he would quietly step in to help without making a fuss, and how those acts of kindness had created ripples that extended far beyond what anyone could measure. One story stood out to the stranger above all others. There was a young family in his neighborhood struggling with bills and basic necessities. They felt invisible, unheard, and trapped in a cycle they could not escape. Her husband had quietly offered assistance, paying bills, providing food, and guiding them toward better opportunities. He did this without ever seeking recognition, never telling anyone what he had done, just simply helping because it was right. The stranger had witnessed some of this firsthand, and had been deeply moved by the selflessness and humility involved. The woman listened with awe, realizing that she had known some of her husband's generous habits, but had never seen the full extent of his quiet impact. It was not just the material help, she understood now, but the hope and dignity he restored in people who felt forgotten. She felt a mixture of pride, sorrow, and inspiration, knowing that his actions had shaped lives in ways she could never have imagined. They spoke of moments where her husband had been a source of strength in crises. The stranger recalled a day when he had faced a major life decision, unsure of which path to take and afraid of failing. Her husband had sat with him, listening patiently, asking questions, and helping him see his own potential. That simple act of guidance had given the stranger the clarity and courage to move forward, changing the direction of his life forever. It was a memory he held close, one that reminded him constantly of the power of empathy and support. The woman felt tears running down her cheeks as she absorbed these stories. Her grief, heavy and raw at the beginning of the day, had transformed into a sense of understanding and even hope. She realized that her husband's life had created a legacy far greater than she had imagined. His influence was alive in the people he had helped, and it would continue to grow as those people carried forward his example of kindness and integrity. The stranger spoke of another instance where her husband's quiet generosity had made a profound difference. There had been a man who was lost and struggling, someone who had given up on himself entirely. Her husband had found him at a moment when he was at his lowest and had offered not just help, but belief in his worth. The stranger explained that the man had gone on to rebuild his life, inspired by the faith shown to him. It was a reminder of how a single act of compassion could have consequences far beyond what anyone could see. The woman thought about her own life and the lives of those around her. She realized that kindness, when offered sincerely and without expectation, could change the world in ways that were invisible but powerful. Her husband had lived this truth every day, shaping lives quietly, creating hope, and teaching others to do the same. The thought brought her comfort, a reminder that even in death, his influence was not gone. It lived on in those he had touched and in the ripple effects of his actions. They spoke of the stranger's life now. Years after her husband had helped him, he had made it a point to live by the lessons he had learned, to help others when possible, and to carry forward the values her husband had instilled. He shared stories of people he had guided, supported, or simply listened to, each inspired by the way her husband had once treated him. Hearing this, the woman felt a renewed sense of purpose. She realized that honoring her husband's memory meant more than mourning. It meant living in a way that reflected the principles he had shown through his actions. The conversation turned toward reflection. They shared memories of her husband's humor, his patience, his calm strength in difficult moments. They laughed softly at stories of small human imperfections, the gentle ways he had reminded people to be better without ever judging them. They sighed at stories of heartache, recognizing the courage it took for her husband to act with kindness even when the world was not fair. Each memory added depth to their understanding and strengthened the connection between them. The stranger spoke of the power of example, how her husband had demonstrated that true generosity was quiet and consistent. It was not about recognition or praise, but about integrity, empathy, and the choice to help others simply because it was right. The woman felt a deep sense of admiration. She had loved her husband deeply, but now she understood that his influence extended far beyond their personal life. He had changed lives, inspired others, and left behind a legacy of hope that could not be measured in money or status. They remained near the grave as the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the cemetery. The atmosphere was calm, filled with the quiet presence of memory and reflection. The woman felt that her grief had transformed into something richer. An understanding of the true impact of her husband's life, she realized that even in loss, there was growth, connection, and the ability to carry forward the lessons he had taught through example. The stranger paused and looked at her with a soft expression. "I wanted you to know," he said, "that his influence is still alive. Every person he helped, every life he touched, continues to carry a part of him. He has given so much, and even now he inspires us to do the same." The woman nodded, feeling a mix of sadness and hope. "I see it now," she replied. "He was not just my husband. He was a man who lived with kindness, courage, and integrity. And his life will continue through us, through the people he touched." They stayed for a while longer, sitting in quiet reflection, sharing thoughts and feelings that words alone could not fully express. There was a sense of closure, not in the sense of ending, but in the sense of understanding, appreciation, and connection. The stranger and the woman had both found a renewed perspective, a deep respect for the life of a man who had lived fully, and a recognition that his legacy would continue to shape the world in ways they could never fully measure. As the day began to fade, they finally rose, taking one last look at the grave. The flowers still bright and fresh, the headstone shining softly in the afternoon light. They exchanged a simple, heartfelt farewell, knowing that the connection they had shared would remain with them. The stranger walked away with a sense of fulfillment, grateful for having shared his story, while the woman felt a renewed sense of purpose and hope. Ready to honor her husband's memory through actions, kindness, and living by the principles he had embodied, the cemetery returned to its quiet stillness. The wind whispering through the trees and the sun dipping behind the horizon. In that space of reflection and connection, the woman and the stranger had found solace, understanding, and inspiration. Her husband's life, once thought to be personal and private, revealed its true impact, a life of quiet generosity, courage, and lasting influence. And in the fading light, both of them carried forward his legacy, ready to live with the same compassion, integrity, and quiet strength that had touched them so profoundly. The following morning was quiet. With soft light filtering through the trees and casting a gentle glow across the cemetery, the woman arrived early, carrying a small bouquet of her husband's favorite flowers. She walked slowly among the rows of gravestones, her heart still heavy, with the awareness of loss, but lighter with the understanding she had gained from the stranger the day before. The stories he had shared lingered in her mind, filling her with gratitude and a renewed sense of purpose. She paused at her husband's grave, kneeling gently to place the flowers. She felt a quiet connection, as if he were listening, as if the kindness and love he had shown in life were still present in that moment. She took a deep breath and allowed herself to feel the full weight of her emotions, grief, love, and a sense of inspiration. Her husband's life, she realized, was far more expansive than she had ever known. It was a life that had touched so many, created hope, quietly shaped the world around him. The stranger appeared a few minutes later, walking slowly toward her. There was a softness in his expression, a mixture of sorrow and calm understanding. They greeted each other quietly, knowing that words were not always necessary. The shared experience of the day before had created a bond between them, a connection forged through grief, respect, and the recognition of her husband's remarkable impact on their lives. They began to talk again, sharing reflections on the previous day's conversation. The stranger spoke of the lives he had touched since her husband had helped him, of the moments when he had paid forward the kindness he had received. He described small victories, moments of joy, and acts of compassion that reminded him constantly of her husband's influence. Each story reinforced the idea that one person's goodness could ripple outward in ways that were invisible, yet powerful. The woman listened, deeply moved. She began to share her own reflections, recounting memories of her husband's gentle guidance, his quiet acts of generosity, and the ways he had shaped her own life. She spoke of the laughter they had shared, small daily moments that had seemed ordinary at the time, but were now precious in retrospect. She realized that his life had not only influenced strangers, but had left a profound mark on her as well. The lessons he had lived by, the importance of empathy, integrity, and kindness, were now a part of her own being. They spent hours at the cemetery, speaking softly and thoughtfully, reflecting on the lessons her husband had imparted through both action and example. The stranger shared stories of people who had been inspired to act with kindness because of what they had witnessed her husband do. He described how he himself had taken those lessons to heart, striving each day to help others in meaningful ways. The woman felt a deep sense of pride, knowing that her husband's legacy was alive and spreading through the actions of those he had touched. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, they spoke of hope and the future. The stranger encouraged her to see her grief not just as a loss, but as an opportunity to continue her husband's work in her own life. He spoke of the importance of noticing others, of offering help without expecting anything in return, and of living a life guided by compassion and integrity. The woman listened intently, feeling the truth of his words and the way they resonated with what she had always admired in her husband. They moved together to another part of the cemetery, where they visited graves of people her husband had helped in the past. The stranger recounted stories of quiet support and assistance, moments of guidance that had transformed lives. Each story revealed a facet of her husband that she had not fully understood: the subtlety of his generosity, the depth of his empathy, and the unwavering integrity with which he lived his life. She felt a profound sense of connection to these stories, realizing that her husband's influence extended far beyond the family and friends she knew. As the day wore on, they spoke of the lessons they had learned from him. They discussed how to approach life with patience, humility, and an open heart. They reflected on the importance of noticing the struggles of others and offering support when it was needed most. They shared their commitment to carry forward the values her husband had embodied, understanding that his legacy was not just in memory, but in action. In the choices they would make and the ways they would impact the lives of others, the woman felt a sense of clarity she had not experienced since her husband's passing. She realized that grief and love could coexist, that loss could be accompanied by a sense of purpose and inspiration. She understood that her husband's life had created a ripple effect of kindness, compassion, and hope, and that she now had the opportunity to contribute to that ripple. To honor him through her own actions, the stranger spoke of the power of example, emphasizing that her husband had never sought recognition but had influenced countless people through his deeds and character. The woman reflected on this, realizing that true impact often comes not from public acclaim, but from quiet, consistent actions that touch hearts and change lives. She felt motivated to embody these principles in her daily life, to act with integrity, and to support others in meaningful ways. As the afternoon light softened, they sat together quietly for a moment, absorbing the peaceful atmosphere of the cemetery. The woman felt a deep sense of gratitude for the encounter with the stranger, for the stories he had shared, and for the opportunity to see her husband's life from a broader perspective. She understood now that his legacy was alive and enduring, carried forward through the lives he had touched and the lessons he had imparted. The stranger looked at her and spoke softly. "Your husband was a remarkable man. His life continues to inspire and guide us. Even now, his influence is present in the people he has helped and in the choices they make. You can see it in me, and I hope you see it in others too." The woman nodded, feeling tears of both sorrow and joy in her eyes. "I see it now," she replied. "His life was not just about what he did for us, but what he did for the world. And I will carry that forward in my actions and in my heart." They rose together, taking one last look at the grave. The flowers still fresh, the headstones softly illuminated by the afternoon sun. There was a sense of closure, not as an ending, but as a beginning, the beginning of carrying forward a legacy of kindness, compassion, and integrity. They exchanged a quiet farewell, knowing that the connection they had formed and the lessons they had shared would remain with them. The woman walked slowly away from the grave, feeling a sense of purpose and resolve. She understood now that honoring her husband meant more than remembrance. It meant action, living in a way that reflected the values he had embodied. She felt inspired to help others, to offer guidance, and to act with the same empathy and generosity that had defined his life. The stranger also left with a renewed sense of purpose. He felt gratitude for having shared his story, for having honored the man who had changed his life, for the opportunity to continue the chain of kindness that her husband had started. Each step he took was filled with the awareness that the lessons he had learned would guide his actions, inspire others, and keep her husband's legacy alive. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow across the cemetery, the woman and the stranger went their separate ways, both carrying with them a sense of connection, inspiration, and hope. The quiet air seemed to hum with the memory of a life well lived, a life of quiet generosity, courage, and integrity. Her husband's influence was far-reaching, enduring, and still present in the world through the people he had touched in the days that followed. The woman felt a renewed commitment to live with intention, kindness, and empathy. She reached out to help others, offered guidance where she could, and carried forward the lessons she had learned. The stranger continued to act with the same values, supporting those in need and inspiring others through his example. The ripple effect of her husband's life continued, touching hearts, changing lives, and spreading hope through their shared experience. Both the woman and the stranger discovered that grief could transform into purpose, and loss could become a motivation to act with compassion. They understood that one person's life lived with integrity and kindness could create a legacy far greater than wealth or recognition. Her husband had lived fully, loved deeply, and changed the world in quiet, profound ways. And in honoring him, they too became part of that enduring legacy, carrying forward the lessons of empathy, courage, and generosity for years to come.